is taken from Ephesians chapter 6, starting verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey not only to win their favor when their eyes are on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both master and yours is in heaven. And there is no favoritism with him. There's a lot to digest in that particular short passage of Ephesians. And we're changing now from Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going into Ephesians chapter 6. But understand this, there's a lot that carries over from the two. So for example, last week we were looking at how one of the main themes was to love and to respect one another. And we can transfer that main theme from the last part of chapter 5, which is actually the whole part, chapter 5, right over to the first part of chapter 6. This idea of love and respect in interpersonal relationships. And we take it from the interpersonal relationship of husbands and wives, and now we transfer broadly to all of our connections as we move forward. And that includes parents and children, and it includes workers. Remembering this too, that in Paul's day, this was rather unusual to hear these type of thoughts. Like, why would you treat a slave or a worker with respect? And conversely, why would you as a worker, as a slave, treat the master with respect? That would just be totally going against the norm of society. But remember, the Bible continually does that, doesn't it? It goes against the norm of society. Society says this is what it's like, and we turn around and go, no, the Bible tells us this. And so we're always going against what society says is acceptable. But I want to tie in this thought as well, too, from Ecclesiastes, one of my favorite passages. You know, if you have a favorite passage, we all do, right? And it's important to have a favorite passage. You know why? A favorite passage will help you to reframe your day. Think about that. We start off our day and everything starts to go wrong. No, that never happens here, right? But everything goes wrong. And we think, oh my heavens, this is going to be my day. But if we stop and we take one of these passages that we consider our favorite, and we repeat it to ourselves, what that does is it reframes the day. And it can start it over again. So here's one for you. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. He, God, has made everything beautiful in its time. In its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. But you may wonder, how does this fit in? Well, stick with me. You'll see. But I also want to share with you the words of Paul to the Colossians, where he says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And then Proverbs 21 and 21, which says, whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life. And they'll also find righteousness and honor. And then Luke chapter 6 and verse 31, the words of Jesus. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Here we see common sense teaching about how to treat one another. And it's all gleaned from their Bible, which is the Old Testament. Paul takes it from the Old Testament, from the Proverbs, for example. And he's teaching such things as to treat other people with love and respect, to show honor to other people, to not exasperate other people. Here's a wonderful term, exasperate. What does that mean? You think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you found somebody be frustrating, irritating? That's exasperating somebody else. Obey authority with respect and sincerity. Don't just do that in front of them, but do that at all times. And give enthusiastic, and I add this word too, passionate service. Like people are going to look at you and go, you really must like your job. No, I hate it, but I just love to do. I love to serve. I like to be. But I'm going to start us off by taking us to verse 4 of Ephesians chapter 6. Now some of you might say, well, why don't we start at verse 1? Because I like verse 4. And I think that it is applicable to the audience. Verse 4 says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, first things first, as a father, I want to say that, hey, it's not just me. Even though it says fathers, even if you look in the Bible, there's a little notation beside it. And that notation means that it's more broad than that. It's more broad. So the Greek says fathers, but the intent is for others as well. And so we say parents. In my Bible it said parents, but I'm going to include others in this category. I think it also refers to grandparents. Some of us fit that category. It refers to aunts and uncles. Some of us fit that category. It refers to caregivers, people who care and help with young people. It refers to everyone. And the Greek is the inference there that it's more broad than just fathers. I'm not going to go deeply into that, but I love going deep into things, believe me, but I'm not going to share everything because it'd be boring you to tears. In Proverbs 22 and verse 6 it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and then when he is old, he will not depart from that. Now the understanding about that is that Proverbs, remember I said a few weeks ago, Proverbs, it's like the person is teaching. He's in a classroom and he's giving instruction. He said, if you do this, this will be the general outcome of it. So we have to remember that it's not always going to turn out exactly like that. And we understand the principle, the idea that when we raise children, well, it's much more complicated than that, isn't it? It's not as easy as putting together, for example, an IKEA cabinet. Has anybody put together an IKEA cabinet? A few of you? When I was overseas, we didn't have kitchens. I didn't understand this until I got there. You bring your kitchen when you move. There's no kitchen. There's a sink. That's it. And you're supposed to bring... How am I supposed to bring my kitchen from Canada to France? And so I petitioned them and said, can I build a kitchen? And they looked at me and said, can you build a kitchen? And I said, well, that was the question I was asking you. Can I build a kitchen? And so we went down to IKEA and we bought this kitchen and we put it together. And we started in page 1, step 1. And of course, you open up the package, and there was a package with 1 million pieces all over. You got a slide there first? There you go, right there. IKEA card. And it says it comes with Allen wrench. Anyways, I had all this stuff before me, and I had my wrench in the middle. And I put together, following the steps, methodically, one after the other, my kitchen. After 1,000 steps, and the Allen key was worn down, I had a kitchen. And a couple of pieces left over. But raising children is not like that. You do step 1, and then you follow with step 2, and then step 3, and step 4, and voila! No! Because we're all very complex people. Here's another thought around that before I go down this path. But right before I start that, Here's my question. Can we trust God with our children, with our grandchildren, with our nieces and nephews? Can we trust God? Now the question is not, is God trustworthy? Because God is trustworthy. The question is, do we have the capacity to trust God? Are we willing to trust God? This is one thing that's important. Another thing that's important when we raise children is seeking wise counsel. I was talking to a person just the other day, and they were going through an exasperating situation, and I realized my place wasn't to give them wise counsel. My place was to listen. And then after they finished talking, and I gave them a few thoughts just to help them to express themselves, they phoned me back a little while later and they said, I really appreciated you listening to me. And after I finished talking, I realized I'm not alone. Did you hear that? It's important to seek counsel if for the only reason is to realize you're not alone, that people love you, they care for you, they're there with you in as much as they can be. But there's an aside of that, and that is that there are always experts out there, right? People who know the answer. When we had children, and I started reading all of these books by psychologists who had the absolute 100% answer. This is what you do. And I realized after a while, you don't know what you're talking about. I read some material by a fellow by the name of Charlie Shedd. Charlie Shedd he was a Presbyterian pastor. He wrote over 40 books on a whole number of topics. And he had some very interesting and wise things to say. Do you mind if I share a few sayings? I really like them. Okay? A couple of quotes from Charlie Shedd. This one here. Seek a happy marriage with wholeness of heart, but do not expect to reach the promised land without going through a whole lot of wilderness together. I like that one. Here's another one. Patience is a particular requirement for relationships. Without it, we can destroy in 1 hour what could take weeks to repair. Isn't that true? This one in particular, like the next one here. Some of the world's best educators are grandparents. I like that one. When he was young and he just finished seminary and he'd gotten his doctorate degree, and he did a parenting seminar, and he entitled the seminar Proven Principles for Effective Parenting. You hear that? Then he and his wife had a child. And they changed the title to Counsel for Those Who Are Trying to Parent. You get the growth now that's happening in Charlie and his wife? And after a few more trials, he changed the title to, here's some suggestion for fellow strugglers. The idea is that parenting is not easy, and there's no one pat answer. It's the reality. I'm going to give you nonetheless some thoughts from the Bible about parenting. Just a couple of thoughts. The first thought is model discipleship. Model discipleship. You know, the word obey literally means this: to hear under. To hear under. What does that mean? It doesn't mean to hear under what? It means to listen from authority. You are under authority, and so you listen from the authority. And so we model discipleship. We're not perfect, but we're genuine. We're sincere. We're doing our best. And so we model this before our children. Obedience. The second thing is to teach the pleasure of giving and of doing the right thing. Teaching the pleasure of giving. Here's a perfect example of that. At Christmas time, we always love the shoe boxes, right? And it's a perfect time to model it. I like it too. I'm like a little kid. I go to the dollar store or wherever, and I pick up all this stuff for one box, and I bring it back, and Judy says, we need 2 boxes. Because I get carried away. I'm enjoying this. But this is a perfect idea and a perfect way to share that with other people, to involve them. Let them have fun. You know, writing a little blessing note. Let them be a part of that. Packing the box. Praying over the box. It's sharing with them the joys of giving. When our kids were young, I always remember this, and I quite often forgot, but I remember it now, how when the Sunday service came and our kids would come up and they would look for a quarter. Why? Because they wanted to give. And we encouraged them. And they would really be happy with that, you know. And sometimes they would say things like, well, does that make any difference? Well, of course it does. But we're modeling to them, and we're helping them to understand the blessings of giving. And then to carry that thought on a little bit more is teaching them the blessings of following God. Following God is not drudgery, although you may feel like it at times. It's not. It's a blessing. That's what I talked earlier on about reframing your day and looking at the blessings of God and realize what a blessing it is. Besides that, you can use this to them and to your advantage. You see, in verse 2 it says, to honor your father and mother, because this is the first commandment that has a promise to it. It's not the first commandment, but it's the first commandment that had a promise, that everything will be well with you and you will have a long life on earth. And you can use that to your advantage. Not saying that you should. But let's get back to this word that I picked out for today. And the word is exasperating. This is exasperating to me. It says, fathers or parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the teaching and instruction of the Lord. Now, let's understand something again. We're going to look at the cultural setting to which Paul is addressing these words. The Ephesians are primarily non-Jewish people who have become Christians. So they're coming out of a Greek and a Roman environment. And for him to say this is revolutionary. Like, why would I worry about how I treat my kids? Why would I worry about if I exasperate my kids? Why would I worry about that? You see, because in their world, kids are nothing. It's the parents, primarily the father. He has absolute, complete authority and power over his children. Let me give you an example. In a Roman home, when a child was born, the child would be brought and put down at the father's feet. And the father's actions would determine the future of that child. So, for example, if the father reached down and picked up the child, everybody would look and say, he has accepted that child into the family. That child is part of the family. However, if he looks down at the child and then turns and walks away, then they take the child and sell it. That's the authority that the father had in those homes. And so Paul is saying, no, it's not God's way. In Psalm chapter 103, verse 13, the words are, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Paul is saying, no, that's not right. This is right. This is right. And so he's telling them something again that is counter-cultural. But he's saying this is the way of God. So do not exasperate our kids. I'm going to use a good example. Coming from the Bible. Remember last week we were talking about the life of Joseph? Now we're going to look at the life of Jacob. Let's take a look at Joseph and Jacob and his brothers for a moment. Joseph, because of his upbringing, he was the great leader in Egypt who helped save many people. But he was in danger of becoming extremely self-centered, arrogant, vain, immature, demanding, manipulative. To the point where he was absolutely useless, or would have been useless to himself and everybody else. Joseph was becoming, in technical terms, a spoiled brat. And how did this happen? How in the world could this ever happen? Because Jacob was spoiling his son. He was a doting father. He was picking favorites, remember? He had two favorites. And some of us could say, well, he'd lost Rachel, his wife, and he only had 2 boys to Rachel. And so, no, he was spoiling his son. He was not scolding him for being arrogant. He was giving him whatever he wanted. He was spoiling Joseph to the point of Joseph becoming absolutely useless. Here's an habilitated young man, and Jacob was spoiling him rotten. And then Jacob was infuriating the other brothers. He had a lot of people in his family. And his brothers, the older brothers to Joseph, were so angry and so jealous, they were ready to kill their brother. Now understand this. Whatever actions that they would take, well, that's on them. Because when you're an adult, you have to assume responsibility. Nonetheless, Jacob was contributing to all of this. And they were becoming murderously bitter because of Jacob's attitude towards them, towards their younger brothers. So that is a good example of exasperating young people, isn't it? Here's a couple of other ideas around how to exasperate young people. Maybe we're good at this and you can tell me a few more. Or maybe you say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Here's one, unclear boundaries. Constant intrusions into their life. Permissive parenting. Doting on them. Low in demands, trying to please them. Being over-involved, trying to fix their problems. I know we care for our kids, but sometimes the worst thing we do is try to fix their problems instead of allowing them to deal with them and to go through them. Here's one, too, that I've seen an awful lot over the years. Emotional enmeshment. What does that mean? We call this spousifying kids. What we do is we share details and information that they're not ready to hear. Our kids are not our counselors, they're our kids. And they want us to treat them like that. And then there's a flip side too, of course, and that is abuse, physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. These are exasperating the children. In the Good News Bible, it says this in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. Parents who choose to care for and discipline their children truly love them and are following God's commands. So it's okay to discipline the children, but here's another thought. We have to be consistent in disciplining. Now, I'm not saying this in a condemning way because I know that when you're tired, it's really difficult to be consistent in disciplining. But nonetheless, inconsistency creates problems, and they want consistency. And they want balanced criticism. The worst thing that you can do to a kid is just tell them, just criticize them instead of giving them any kind of a positive praise. I hated walking into the garage because my father was very fussy, and that's the way he was treated. But I'd pick up something and he'd look at me, that's the wrong tool. What's the right tool? I don't know. And then one day he said to me, well, you might as well get out because you're not helping me at all. Thank you very much. And I went back into a garage for years. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a mechanic. That's my excuse anyway. But you see this balance. Getting back to the question again, and we're going to sort of draw this to a conclusion for today, is will we trust our children to God? Remembering this, that as precious as they are to us, He loves them even more. He loves them even more. See, Jacob was doing a terrible job of raising his kids, but one thing he did instill in them that I've seen as I read the story in Genesis, that he instilled a faith in them, didn't he? When Joseph was in the prison, it says God was with him, but Joseph realized who God was. And he realized that he was with him. Jacob was still able to instill a faith in God, even though he wasn't a perfect father. We see that in Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20, when Joseph says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph had a faith. He had a faith. And there's some hope that we can have. We might feel at times that, oh, we've done a terrible job, or I could have done it better. But you pray that you instill a faith in them as well, too. And then here's another thought that I want to tie in with that and leave this with us today. And that is that when you pray and you leave them in the hands of God, trust God. Trust God with them. I like this analogy that the will of God is like a flowing river. Have you ever been in the Red River? If you don't put an anchor down, what's going to happen? It's going to carry you wherever it wants, right? Because it's constantly flowing. And the will of God is like that. It's constantly flowing. It's constantly moving. And it's moving in one direction, right? Because it's the will of God, and it's moving towards the purpose and intent of God. And we are in that. And in spite of the fact that we feel that our lives might be taking us in all different directions, we are in the will of God, and it's taking us where He chooses. And it's taking our children and our grandchildren and our nieces and nephews where He chooses. Remember this. God is never, never not working. He is never, ever not working. He is always working and accomplishing His will. Even if He seems like He's out of the equation, that's not the case. The will of God is always moving us forward in His will. And also this. Never, ever think that you can figure it out. Isn't that true? We'll never be able to completely figure it out. See, let's take a look quickly at Joseph, or Jacob. If Joseph had known what was going on earlier on, he could have saved a lot of problems, right? I was thinking about a show. You ever heard the show Highway to Heaven with Michael Landon? You know, this person's going around doing good and helping people solve their problems. Well, just think about that. If Michael Landon came back in the day of Jacob, and he comes over to Jacob and he goes, "Jacob, listen to me right now. You're spoiling your son. He's supposed to help a lot of people, but you're spoiling him rotten. Stop it right now." Jacob goes, "Oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. I'm stopping from this moment on." And then he go, "Hey, Jacob, you know what you're doing?" He said, "Your older sons are murderously bitter against Joseph. And they're going to kill him. You make sure that you stop that right now." "Okay, I got it. I'm on it." "Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a famine in 25 years. You better get ready." "Oh, well, I'm glad you told us that. We're going to get ready for it." So there you go. In a half an hour with a couple of commercial breaks, all the problems have been solved. And Jacob would sit back and go, "Got it. We're good." Doesn't work like that, does it? It's over 20 years before he sees his son. Over 20 years. It's a lot of heartache. But guess what? Joseph is growing. Jacob is growing. The brothers are growing. And the will of God is being accomplished, and nothing stood in its way. Nothing stood in its way. And that's a good thought for us to remember. There's a song that we used to sing, and I'm going to leave us with that for this morning. And I don't know if you've heard that song, "In His Time." He makes all things beautiful in His time. It's taken from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. Let me just share the words. "Lord, please show me every day as you're teaching me your way, that you do just what you say in your time. Lord, my life to you I bring. May each song I have to sing be to you a lovely thing in your time." Are we able to trust God with ourselves and with the things and the people that are most precious to us?